Hello, this is Mark A. Lewis. This is the Sacred Village podcast. Today we're going to be delving further into the nuances in the world of community. Title The Sacred Village. It's definitely that tether, an anchor for me as I delve into many subjects and existential realms and physical realms, human relations. I would have been happy to do a podcast specifically on relationship of man and woman, woman, man, just delving into that monogamous or perhaps polyamorous, but my interest is the sustainability and the union of monogamous relationships. And it doesn't mean that I'm not interested in what other people are doing and how people are going about it and, what's working for them, what's not working for them. This quantum soup that we're in, there are no rules. There are just human beings being human, and there are energies, and there is a spiritual and sacred aspect to being a human being. We are connected to this realm, to these other realms, to these spiritual aspects, the emotional aspects, and there are patterns, there are archetypes, and beyond what we can talk about and make films about and tell stories about and do analysis around in terms of Jungian analysis. But, there's this intellectual exploration of these realms, but then there's what's real. There's what's settled in our body, in our felt sense, in the present moment. This complex mosaic of what we can identify as being human, the emotional realm, and what we see, visuals, dream time, the exploration of these, and how it makes us feel. That word to feel. And with all of that, there's this spiritual, untangible, unquantifiable, unqualifiable aspect of existence that, as much as we may, chase it and desire to know it, desire to put a box on it, to tie a bow on it, it's just not going to happen. And yet we can still explore that, we can discuss that, and it can take us into so many different places, so many tangents, so many levels of contemplation and existence and experience. But at the center of that all, so, for me, I chose the sacred village as that tether, that place to return to, because in my experience through ceremony and just through life in general, this sacred connection that I speak about, that for me always takes me back to innocence. It takes me to the innocent of a community, of a ecosystem, whether it's animals or humans or even vegetation. There's this energy that the young have, like that the cycle of life, and when it moves from seed into birth, into those initial aspects of being, there's an energy there that is sacred, that is very unique, and I'll say that we lose it as we get older, and we don't lose it, and so that's a paradox. Also, it's always also there, and yet the priority, what is precious, does circle back to what is more recently born and vulnerable, and without tether, without knowing, without knowledge, without orientation. It's not just programming of our DNA, of our Darwinian evolutionary instincts, that evolved over thousands of years. Don't get me wrong, it's also that. So another paradox, but it's more. I know that to be true. It goes much deeper than that. It goes into, the deepest part of our hearts, the deepest parts of our being, and into the cosmos, and through infinity, and somehow cycles and circles back again to this present moment. I mean, that's what I see. I've had glimpses of that, and it's certainly above my pay grade to delve any further than just to sort of paint this picture of, what I've seen and what I've been taught, the teachings that have been passed on to me in ancestral ways and indigenous ways, and just the ways of ceremony and of being with elders, being with the teachings of the unseen and all the rest. And so we have community. And today, we're going to meet a good friend of mine, somebody that I met over probably a couple of years ago now, but became closer friends with through a men's circle, a closed circle that we met monthly. And, I'll get into this circle a little bit more. I think it's important to delve into that because we've learned a lot by how we've structured it and how we've delved into it. The experience of being ceremony-like, but not being ceremony at all. It's a gathering. It's a circle. You get together in a circle and good things begin to happen. So that's what we do once a month. And without further ado, Luke Dabadi. Did I get that pronunciation right, Luke, for your last name, bro?
Yeah, it's close enough. It's a tricky one. Dabadi.
Dabadi.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Luke Dabadi. Thank you, Mark. Happy to be here. Yeah.
Yeah, welcome. And Men's Circle. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure to be on that journey with you, to get to know you better in that space. We'll want to discuss developing community models and structures and this business/institution, in a good way, this way of bringing coherence. We're going to want to explore all that, but I want to start with the Men's Circle. How do you feel about that? How's that been going for you?
Well, the Men's Circle has been phenomenal. I think it's something that all of us should do in some capacity, is connect with people of our same gender in a deep, meaningful way, whether that's a men's circle. Some people do that through sporting events and stuff as well. But something I've been doing on and off for most of my adult life, and whenever I'm doing it, it's always valuable because it's nice to meet with strong men and always work together to be the best men we can be, and that makes us better fathers, better partners, better business people, etc. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. I've enjoyed the journey. Look forward to the next chapter as well.
Yeah, it's going to be a good chapter. We're collaborating here on another cycle that we call them. I very much look forward to that. Here we are, this direction towards Sacred Village. You're all about community. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are? And yeah,
sure. I'll take you back to where that started. My parents were from Trinidad, so they grew up on an island. People who live on an island, and you'll see this in lots of more isolated kind of cultures, people tend to work together because you're kind of all on the island together in a sense. So I grew up in a community-based environment, which I've come to learn is actually not true for everybody. A lot of people grow up in a more isolated 6-foot fence type of world where you don't rely on your neighbors or even your blood family as much. So anyways, that was kind of my first taste. And then second of all, I had my awakening in my early 20s, which would be over 20 years ago now. I kind of learned that there was a small group of people running the world and kind of maybe not doing the best job of that. And then we won't need to get into that necessarily, but I came to learn that some of the things that I'd been taught by my parents and by the school system and from the TV and stuff wasn't actually true. And in a response to kind of take some power back and start to project inward, I realized that, the real answer, the way to save the world, if you will, was to build resilient communities where we could take our reliance away from big corporations and big, powerful leaders, and we could bring that power back into our hands and into our communities and into our families if we just kind of recycle it in that sense. And, if you look at history, a lot of the most successful countries, societies, etc., were those who lived in different forms of community. Some were matriarchal based, some were set up in various different ways. But the idea of community really is a valuable one. And so since my early 20s, so over 20 years ago, I've kind of had a mission to build community, help build resilient communities. I think the real answer to saving the world, if you will, is to build a community of communities where we learn to rely on each other more and more and rely on things like government and stuff like that less and less. I think that's a kind of the way forward and a smart way to go. And so that's been kind of my jam is helping communities get going. I also have Academy Anara, which we could talk more about later, which is kind of an education institution that is designed to be rolled out through communities. I also have created something called Tribal Commerce, which is a tool for managing commerce within communities as well. So yeah, I'm about as community as you can get. I really think it's the way to go, and I love being in community. And I know sometimes it's not the easiest way to go, but I do think it's the way forward, and so I'm committed to that.
We're very, very much aligned the way that we view the world. For me, that the dominant culture, I see some people existing in that in a way that seems to work for them. And so, I've learned to not to judge another person's experience. And that being said, there were so many things that were making me physically sick. And, I reflect on that and it's like, yeah, some of that's upbringing, but so much of it is the paradigm of the culture that I grew up in, from the public school system and the way that food is processed and created and sold and advertised. And, the lack of coherence in relationship was a profound struggle for me. And there are many layers to that, but certainly the culture is a big part of that. I want to hear about your wake up. Can you share a little bit about that, the 20 years ago moment or moments?
Yeah. I was a pretty ambitious young guy. I went off to university, had some good grades, and I wanted to make millions and have a corner office and a bunch of status and stuff like a lot of 18-year-old kids are kind of led to desire. And when I started going down that path a couple of feet, I started to see an ingenuity in it. And I felt more and more non-alignment with kind of chasing that corner office. And at the same time, I learned things. I got to stick my head down the rabbit hole, if you will, and I kept on going deeper and deeper and pulling different strings. And I learned that a lot of the foundation of which I was building my life on, even the things that I wanted and desired, were things that had been kind of given to me through the TV or had been given to me through the mainstream kind of dharma. And so I realized that wasn't actually who I am and what I was. And so, I went inward. I went on a spiritual journey, got into yoga, did different things. But in doing that, I really kind of got in alignment with what my soul purpose is or soul journey. And I've really, from that day forward, I've really centered everything around that. Like in terms of what I think is the most important thing people should do, I think it is to get in alignment with their soul journey. I have the belief that we're all here to do something unique to us, and we have somewhat of an always like we somewhat owe it to ourselves to figure out what that is and go and do it, or at least give it a good kick at the can as best we can. And I believe if we all did that, if we all lived our lives in that way, you just have a bunch of people that were on purpose, living in flow, following spirit, or their higher self, whatever they call it at your house. We all have names for this same thing, God, whatever. But if we were all kind of following that inner guidance, the inner compass, if you will, then that would just make for a much more heart-centered, peaceful, relaxed, I think, sustainable world. So I try to do that by being a role model to, my children and the children around me, and just live my life that way. So if others want to do that too, they can have access to what that might look like. And I can surround myself with people who are also living from that centered, that heart-centered, spirit-based place. In my 20s, and it stayed true until today, is that I'm here to help build community, help architect community. So I many years ago, I used to call myself an architect of the new paradigm, and put that on business cards at one point as well. And what that meant was that I was here to help build out the new earth, a more circle structure based kind of existence. And that can be done in businesses, for-profit businesses. It can be done in families. It can be done in all kinds of communities, is working in a more circle based, community based way. So, yeah.
Yeah. Circle based. Can you be more specific about what that means?
One of the tools that I use is called sociocracy, and what they teach and how they're using the circle is, in a circle, everyone is somewhat equal in the sense of we're all sitting in a circle. It's not so much hierarchical. But that doesn't mean that everyone's equal in terms of the responsibilities they take on or the experiences they have. There's elders. In my tool, Tribal Commerce, there's three kinds of people. There's on any given topic, you're either a student, you're competent, or you're an elder or a master. Those are the three kind of areas we fall into on various topics. And so in a circle, you have a combination of those three types of people on any given topic or subject or subject matter. And so that's what a community is all about, is acknowledging where the people in the circle are when it comes to a certain topic, and then using that wisdom, that experience, to move the community forward in whatever direction the community might be heading. And good communities are heading in a direction together. It's one of the glues and one of the fundamental pieces of any community is what are the core values and the kind of joint mission vision that everyone's working towards, because there's lots of different circles you can be part of. So
Again, fully aligned, with how I see the world and the teachings that I've received in ceremony, and again with those elder teachings. So we have this dominant culture, and it's obviously very dominant throughout the world, the entire globe. And there are pockets of communities, aligned communities, and people like ourselves that are trying to take steps towards something more heartfelt, more connected to aspects of ourselves, not just our mind, not just the programming or the expectation of others of, if you do this, you will get that. And if you get that, then we will like you more, or we will give you more prestige, acknowledgement by an institution, whether it's like, a council of academics at a university, or the boss, the CEO, the various sort of higher ups in a corporation. There's esteem associated with accomplishment, but once you begin to see through the veil, and that reminds me, now I think this is kind of a nice segue. There, once upon a time, I don't know if it was 20 years ago, before or after, but you met Donald Trump. What happened there?
well, yeah, that's an interesting story. So my first career after college was writing a book. So me and a buddy of mine, we wrote a self-development book for college students called. So it was a book in the series The Power of Focus. I don't know if you remember the Chicken Soup books. They were doing Chicken Soup for Mom Soul, Dad Soul, the Dog Soul. So it was the same publisher, and they wanted to expand into the college market. So we worked with them to do a college book. So anyways, long story short, when you're 20 years old, you're looking for credibility. You're looking for people to kind of help you get lifted up, because you don't have a lot of experience at that point. So we opted to find somebody of a big name who could do the forward for our book. Long story short, we got Trump to do the forward for our book. And this was like pre-President Trump. This was like Apprentice Trump, if you remember that version of Trump. Mm-hmm. Not that it's not the same Trump, and I know people have mixed reviews on Trump, which we don't need to get into, but the idea is he was a big name. And, I remember meeting him, and we had a short meeting with him in his office downtown New York, which was good. He had some good advice. We got 20 minutes with him, and he had some good kind of, big businessman advice for the young, ambitious kids, me and my business partner at the time, Andrew. And it was a lot of fun. We went through a process of actually visualizing someone like Trump doing a forward for us. And we went through all the networking steps and did a lot of things to make that happen. So it was a real lesson in thinking big and shooting for a big thing. And I think overall it was helpful. We also did some work for Trump University, which was an online university at the time. It's no longer. We also did some work with Trump on that. So that was kind of fun. It was a fun, my first career out of college. It was a fun experience. Learned lots, got to travel lots, got to meet Trump. And now it's just a funny story, because Trump has become a lot more controversial in the last 2 decades, you could say. Mm-hmm. So, and well known. So, that's the Trump story. It's kind of fun. So
there's something not quite, but almost sci-fi about that story. Like it seems like an episode of, or the beginning of the episode of Black Mirror or something.
Could be.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was 20 years ago. So it was well before, President Trump. So I like to kind of keep it in that pocket of past,
Right. Yeah. No, it's a beautiful narrative. And, so segueing into that vision of communities, working with other communities, becoming untethered from government, I've always felt like the indigenous territories, the Secwepemc or the Okanagan or the Coast Salish, there's countless territories that they'll somehow play a role in organizing or being spokespeople for the land and keeping the traditions and the language of these different territories very much alive, while the rest of us somehow find a place within that's also akin to, a different tribal way, so to speak, or a different community way that is very much aligned, very much allies within that context, but moving outside of the framework of colonialism, like the colonial construct and countries, provinces, the ways that the colonial settlers divided things up and compartmentalized things. But that being said, there would be a government outside of that, institutions that help manage transportation, the highways, the ways that we connect from one community to the next, and also to a degree the Western medical institution would somehow still survive in that way, but very much align with the needs of the community. What can you tell me? How do you view it? How do you see this kind of playing out over the next, let's say, 100 years, or maybe even the next 20 years, whatever speaks to you?
Yeah, great question. Like, I do think that the way things are currently set up, call it the status quo or the mainstream architecture of society, I think it's unsustainable. It's too top heavy, and we're seeing the collapse of it. And without getting into the details of what that's looking like, we're just seeing the breakdown of this kind of lots of power at the top, lots of injustice at the bottom, kind of idea. And there's lots of lies and lots of different mechanisms and programming and control mechanisms at play that keep it all together. And I think that that's done in a really unsustainable way. And so anything that's unsustainable or anything that's out of balance eventually comes back into balance. Things have to eventually, the pendulum eventually swings the other way, so to speak. And so I think what we're seeing and have been seeing for the last few decades is this growing movement of people who want to live in community, want to have community relations, whether that's local farming, whether that's a bunch of hippies living on a eco farm together, or whether it's just a bunch of community houses all kind of networked within a big city. It looks a lot different depending on where you go on the earth, but it's happening everywhere. These people who, like you and me, Mark, who are seeing value in community, that is having circle structured meetings or ceremonies, whether it's super organized or super loose, whether it's more social based or religious based, doesn't really matter. It comes in lots of different shapes and sizes, but I see that idea is growing. The idea of community, the concept of a village seems to be a topic that is more discussed today than it was yesterday, and will be discussed more tomorrow than it is today. And I like that. That's a stat that really impresses me. And I think that people are learning that if we just work with the people around us, with our like-minded people, in a way that is incorporating balance and respect for the earth, that's a big part of the imbalance of our current mainstream system, is this really seeing the earth as this kind of resource as opposed to seeing it as this like living organism that's in harmony with us. So I think as we shift to a higher spiritual place, a lot of the things we used to do or have been programmed to do no longer are in alignment, and therefore we're moving to do, call it high vibrational things, more in a community, more in a heart-centered, love-based way that's less about money and less about power, and is more about being in alignment, and is more about feeling good on an emotional, spiritual, and physical level. And that's really why I think community is a hot topic. It's a big topic, but yeah, I think we're seeing the collapse of the matrix, and we're seeing the rise of circle communities and the rebirth of a more peaceful, regenerative human civilization, to put it in big
Mm-hmm.
words,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And there's a very interesting, that we're able to witness in our lifetime, presumably, and so far this has already happened, where there's been, we've been witnessing the collapse of this, the very slow collapse of old structures and old institutions and old ways of being. That being said, there are billions of people that are tethered to this matrix still, and for us to be in our hearts. My feeling is that if we're in our hearts, we're fully in alignment with the greater good. Like if we are truly in our hearts, we are fully in alignment with the greater good, not just what is best for us, not just what is best for our families, what is best for our families, but also what is best for the greater good. I feel very clear about that. However, if everybody were to jump into the greater good, certainly we would work together. Something would manifest that would allow us to take the time necessary to deconstruct and support and allow for safe passage, through this, unprecedented threshold. Yet the perception of people being in their hearts, from that dominant culture is that it's still a hippie kind of woo-woo thing, with all sorts of different stigmas associated, from pauper to lazy to disillusioned to dissociative, you name it. There's these judgments from, not knowing what that really means to be fully aligned, in our hearts, and this idea, of there being a connection there. But that's not happening that way. It will be a gradual thing. We're going to have pockets of people doing it this way, where the dominant culture will remain. I do feel like we're kind of getting in a sailboat, or maybe even a cruise ship. The people like yourself and myself and others, and we're kind of going off into the ocean on our own, and we're creating something new with or without them. And,
Mhm.
there's a sadness that can come with that, but there is an untethering. Like, it's not like we're all in it together. It's just not that. I just personally don't see it that way. Although we are also all in it together in the long game. And so it's just this process. Yeah. What's your take?
Well said. I do think that, one step up, we are all one, so we're connected that way. But in this human experience, I do agree with you, Mark, where I think there's some people who are, quickly crossing the rainbow bridge and getting on that cruise ship with us, because they see things for what they are. And then there's a lot of people who are just having their human experience where they are, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and one is not good and one is not bad. And one thing I learned many, many years ago is you can't drag people across the rainbow bridge and onto the cruise ship until they're ready, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And there's enough people who are ready. There's a lot of people who have been ready for a long time and have been waiting for us to come along. We are the ones we've been waiting for. There are enough of us,
Mm-hmm.
light workers, they used to be called, people of the new paradigm. There's lots of names, for these people, new earthers, whatever, but people who are kind of ready to step into their soul journey, ready to take humanity to the next level, and to just play their role, whether that's a leadership role or not. So yeah, I felt that for a long time, and I have felt at times a bit of the black sheep, in some groups. But what I've realized is that once I find my people, as they're often called, that is
Mm-hmm.
one of the communities, one of the many communities that I'm part of, is that community of more new paradigm folks who are building the rainbow bridge and building what's on the other side of that bridge too. And that's my life's work. That's our life's work. But
Mm-hmm.
some other people have different journeys, that take them in different directions. And if that's a little more mainstream or what have you, that's fine too. I think some people will join later. Some people will never join, and there's no judgment. There's no time for judgment. That's just fine. We should be more focusing on our journey, not the journeys of others.
Yeah. I mean, what it comes down to for me, this tether of the sacred village, and that being the intention, the direction, there isn't a higher objective, and value in this lifetime. As far as I know, in this present moment, that's as high as it gets. So that obviously is a priority. And if other people don't have that priority, or think it's fiction or utopia, that, something that you read in a science fiction novel, they're not going to be as keen, and they're not going to join in the process of manifesting it. So I come across somebody like you, and it's like, oh my goodness, we're allies. We're whether we end up in the same village, we're still allies. Like, we're creating something that's not just specific to our land, the whatever number of people end up being in that village. There's a larger community that's also forming, that is a broader village. We may not know each
Absolutely.
other, but we're supporting each other.
Yeah, we
So,
used to call that building the new paradigm. That was the language we used to use for many years. It's like,
yeah,
we're building a new paradigm, and what that means and exactly what that looks like is to be determined. But we're kind of the understanding that we're building this thing that's kind of on the other side of the rainbow bridge, and
mm-hmm,
that's kind of mo number one. And
mm-hmm,
that's kind of your ticket onto the cruise ship. Once you kind
mm-hmm.
of get that and resonate with that, that's your self-admitting ticket into the cruise ship. And
It
uh,
really is that. You don't have to be invited. You just have to have an intention to be a part of it.
Yeah, exactly. And then the key from there is find out what piece of the puzzle you are, and then just play
Mm-hmm.
that piece out. Just be the best version of your piece of the puzzle you can be.
Yeah,
And then trust that if everybody else does even a half-assed job of that, we'll have a pretty good puzzle, you know? Um,
100%. Yeah.
And
And
it's
there's another piece is willingness to stick around, because it's not going to be easy. And when you get into, a higher vibration of living in community, there's a lot of wounding that has to be undone, that has to heal in order to be able to live in that village, where there's continuity and coherence in the day to day. There's a lot of figuring it out intellectually and sharing of ideas, but there's also a lot of letting go emotionally, patterns that we're used to, things around safety, things around trust in a subdivision where you're not connected to any of your neighbors really on a deeper level. Physically, you can be safe. Is that your definition of coherence? It's a different thing, because we may become untethered from certain institutions that have been there for us, in terms of preserving our lives, particularly if we're privileged people, within that matrix. But we have to then cooperate in order to find other means of feeling that sense of safety. And it might look different.
and you bring up a good point just a moment ago, Mark, about the healing, like what we used to call as the healing journey. So that was one of our kind of litmus tests for people coming into the community was, how are you doing on your healing journey? And if somebody kind of looks at you funny, as if to kind of say, well, what healing journey?
Mm-hmm.
That's an indication that they don't even recognize that everybody has traumas, everybody has programming, everybody has what do you call that? The intergenerational traumas that come from, other places. And so if you don't realize that you have all these things and you can't work on those, leveling up, people also call it, there's 1,000 ways to say it. But the idea is that in order to be a higher vibrational, more heart-centered, more on-path version of yourself, you have to heal, you have to level up, you have to move through traumas, move past things that are holding you back, whether that's limiting beliefs or programming or some kind of energetic blockage, whatever. It comes up in lots of different ways. So that's a big one too, is like in these communities, these new paradigm communities we're talking about, one of the things that we are always doing is we are leveling up, we are expanding, and that means that we're healing, we're getting rid of limiting patterns, we're getting rid of limiting beliefs, we're getting rid of lower vibrational programming at a DNA level or whatever, so that we can have more and more high vibrational ways about us, so we can do our work. The way is actually through, and the only way through is to go through at a higher vibrational frequency than we started, and just constantly be leveling up. And that can look different for every person. Everybody's journey is different, but we should all be healing and expanding as we go along. It's really necessary, especially, to have that inner strength to take on the journey that's ahead of us,
Totally. You can't just decide that you want to be in community and bring the old paradigm, the old way of doing, the old way of being into that and think that it's going to work. I mean, there's so much letting go of attachment and perspective. Leveling up in terms of how you view the world is a big deal. There are things you have to let go of. There was a teaching from a Blackfoot elder that spoke about this paradigm, about what you're referring to, and how he framed it was that there's self-actualization and then community actualization that follows. And what follows that, the third, is cultural continuity. And it's in that order. There's so much work that needs to be done at that individual level. And then once you do that, it's like your heart's open. It's like, okay, what's next? Who are the people that I'm drawn to? And then those conversations start, and more healing happens on those two levels.
Yeah,
and then expands to the cultural, cultural continuity. So,
yeah, it's true. And there's an old saying that says, if you want to get past a certain problem or challenge or limiting circumstance, you have to move to a level of thinking that is greater than where you created that problem from. So, if you created the problem down here on level 5, well, the solution lies on level 6, 7, or 8. So you have to move up to that level to find the solution that gets you out of the level 5 problem, so to speak. And so what that basically means is that life is a continual upward spiral of awakening or growing or ascending, whatever you want to call it, so that you can continue to move up that vibrational frequency spiral so that you can have more healing, more growth, and then therefore move the path, walk your soul journey, the next steps,
Hmm.
and that's the fun of it. And that's also why some people opt out of that, and they just opt to have a comfortable human existence at a certain level. Maybe they refuse to take on certain new beliefs, or believe that certain things that they're doing are not the best way of doing things, because you have to find a humble inside, and you have to make change on sometimes like literally a DNA level in order to transcend where you are. And that's not a comfortable experience. We all know what it's like to be outside your comfort zone. By definition, it's uncomfortable. And
Hmm.
so that's part of the journey that some people aren't ready to take on, because the why isn't big enough. For those of us,
Hmm.
Mark, and I think you're like this as well. When you know in your deep inner core that something is worth doing and has to be done and is the purpose for being here, that's where you get the strength to push through that discomfort and into the next level of whatever unknown. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
100%.
and
And
that's
not
part of the fun.
everybody is not everybody is meant to be a pioneer, or questioning the status quo. They're just wanting to go to work and make the money they need for their families and lead a simple life, and maybe go to Disneyland or something once a year or whatever. And they'll be there eventually. A lot of people that'll just be grateful for the changes. Once they get to level 5
Totally.
without even aspiring to ever get there, they'll just arrive there. And I'll be like, oh shit, that's what they were talking about.
And I think it's a lesson for all of us, if people haven't got the memo already, that it's not up to us to decide when people are ready, because sometimes we might want to bring our mom or our best friend from high school. It's more important that we ascend at the rate and level that is right for us, and just let
Hmm.
everybody else have that same use of their free will, and they'll come along when they're ready. And if they don't come along, that's fine too.
Hmm.
There's no judgment about that. There's no one is not necessarily better than the other. We just need to do what's right for us. And for those of us who are building the new paradigm, that is building the rainbow bridge, which is the transitional state that we're really in now, and then also building that which is on the other side, which we're still figuring out. But we
Yeah.
know it's more circle communities. We know it's more heart centered. We know it's more yoga and breathing. And we know it's more oneness, unity consciousness. And so if we just lead with that foot, we'll get to the right place when we're due to get there.
Yeah. And just trying to stay humble along the way, and open to that collaborative, and as people, as we join forces with other people for that collaboration to be able to have a life of its own. And yeah, the individualism is kind of falling to the wayside. It's certainly not communism, and it's certainly, it's not an ideology. It's not a construct. It is a heart centered, way of being, and trusting that things are going to manifest in a good way if we stay centered in that space, and do our spiritual practice, like just stay centered and continue to respond to, what feels right, have those conversations and take those steps that feel that we've, that kind of light us up, and that feel like they're in love consciousness. They're in that loving way. That's segue into the project that you're working on. What can you give us a broad strokes about, what you're doing, and what this passion project of yours looks like?
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. Well, I do a lot of things, related to community. And my biggest project as of late is what I call an Academy Anara, which is really kind of an educational platform or institution that would ideally be weaved into local communities across the globe over time. But the idea is, a lot of people know that the education system, the public school system, what have you, is, it's not necessarily doing a great job. And so there's, particularly in the COVID times, there's been a lot of movement to homeschooling kids and world schooling kids and unschooling kids and all sorts of different things. And so Academy Anara really is just a project that it really embraces all that. The idea is that, young children, pre-pubic children, as we kind of look at it in Academy Anara, they have certain needs, certain things we want to teach them. And then there's a bit of a rites of passage as they move into that kind of post-pubic teenager world, where they start to prepare for a life of being adult and start to move into potentially, making money and choosing more of a life path. So the idea of Academy Anara, without, getting too into the weeds on it, is just creating a framework where communities who want to really work with their children more in kind of a homeschooling kind of capacity, I guess you could say, they can go to Academy Anara, incorporate some of the ways that we're trying to teach kids the new paradigm stuff, some of the ways that other people are doing it around the world, and eventually create a community across the world of different communities that are using some of those tools to basically bring children up in a way where they can be more ready for what we've been calling in this conversation the new paradigm, the new earth that won't be as hierarchical, will be more heart centered and more circular, and also a lot of the things that exist right now might not exist in a few decades from now, like things like governments and these sorts of things. And so, what would it look like to live in a world without that stuff? And what skills are important, whether that's as simple as sharing and reading and writing, or maybe it's learning about the herbs that grow in your local area. You know, there's no right or wrong answer to what we should have the kids be learning. But the idea is that we the people, should be creating that curriculum, creating that architecture, and then putting the kids through that in a way where we're supporting each other. So, that's kind of the real high level Cole's notes of what Academy Anara is. Really, my daughter, she's kind of reaching that school age. She's 4 now. And I've always had the vision of building out some kind of education system program that interlaces with, existing world schooling, homeschooling kind of stuff, because there's lots of cool stuff already out there. So yeah, that's really what I'm trying to do, is just really build that together. And the hope is eventually to have places like your land, for example, Mark, where these kind of people can gather, these kind of children can come together and learn things that wouldn't normally be taught, call it, in regular schools. And hopefully that can start to turn them into the human beings that they're going to need to be to take over leadership of the planet at this time. So that's essentially the idea.
It begs the question in a way, because we get to choose and use our intuition and have conversations about the direction that we are guiding our children in, as opposed to just handing them over to an institution that is about the country. It's about gross domestic product. It's about, productivity for what, some politicians would call the greater good, but as actually in my experience, alienated my greater good in terms of my emotional, psychological, and relational health. That was abandoned, by the greater good of the quote unquote greater good of the institutional, the public school system. And so, there's probably a middle ground somewhere as we try to figure out, how much are we prioritizing our village, our community, like you said, the herbs, like the medicines of our land, the connections with the indigenous elders and those traditions, and how much are we prioritizing the direction of the world, saving the world, being a part of that, and without compromising the connection that we have to our village, that we have to our people, that we have to our land. Like, is there a point where, what happens outside of our community? Let's say, we got our 150 people, and, that's like the adage is that beyond 150 people, you start to lose track of people, and leadership. The leaders begin to lose track of, and a lack of connection with the people that they're actually leading, which is where you get colonialism. You create institutions and constructs where you can lead people without knowing them through manipulation. Obviously, there's no other way to do it. And so, as we navigate all these different frameworks and priorities, I don't know. It's an amazing time, because I just love to delve into this stuff. And I love that you're my friend, because you can go there and we can have these almost sci-fi like conversations as we talk about the future and these frameworks and everything and all the possibilities. But yeah,
totally. And I like it. It's also my niche, right? There's some people who are busy rolling out this stuff, and we're busy architecting and just even talking about it. And that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the job at this time. Is everything starts as an idea. Everything comes into the mind as a thought before it manifests into something. So if we can keep these ideas flowing and conversations happening, more and more people can grab onto what we're talking about and implementing it in a way that feels good in their backyard, in their community. And that's the beauty of it. And that's the exciting part.
100%. And we're going to be able, the podcast, I've committed to a year. I suspect it'll go longer, but I look forward to having conversations with you over time as this grows, as we have little milestones and we get to reflect on and look back on, where we were, and we have a recording of that. We have a record of that, which I think is kind of cool. And one thing that's coming to mind now is that if there's any, for people, if anyone's listening that is curious about what we're talking about, but also it's a little bit foreign and they haven't taken that step, what advice would you give to that person in terms of what is that first step out of the matrix or out of something that's not satisfying for that individual and they are longing for community? What do they do?
Great question. I think one thing that everybody should do, if they're not doing it already, is just live their life in a way that's seeking alignment with their soul journey. And the reason that that's so important is if you can become one of these people that can learn to listen to God or spirit and just take that leadership on a daily or hourly level, it can make life so much easier because you can actually feel that connection to that higher self, and you can have that support with you all the time. It's always there, but if you can become more aware of that, I think that's a great place to start. And then second to that, there are communities all around you that are happening, that are budding, that are going through their growing, expanding pains. And so just encourage you to interact with them. Go to a potluck, go to a sound bath, go to a yoga studio and chat with one of your neighbor students who you think is cool after the class, and just venture out and build that community that's already kind of half built all around you. Because we are at a time where we have to build that community. And the community is not always in an isolated place on a certain piece of land, although there are those types of communities. A lot of time, particularly in cities and stuff, the community is webbed and is spread out throughout that city or that town. But they're connected through events. They're connected through influencers and leaders in that community. So just finding out who those people are, aligning with them, going to events. Potlucks are magical because they're community-based events just by design, because they're not a dinner party or a restaurant where there's a hierarchy in those kind of experiences, whereas a potluck is, everyone's bringing a dish and then we're all eating together. So those are always great places to find people. And then the important thing is also to find your people, which is often a subset of any community. You're not going to love everybody in a community. You don't have to. That's actually some good advice. Don't expect to love everybody in a community. Just be able to coexist. All the animals in the forest don't necessarily get along in the sense that the lion does eat the gazelle and that sort of thing, but they all coexist in nature together. So that's like a real lesson, is like we need to be able to coexist with other people in community, but have boundaries, healthy boundaries, clear boundaries, and also have our favorite people and have enough space of people who maybe we aren't fully aligned with, but we can still have peaceful relations with those people. Because being able to navigate relationships in community is really one of the most important things. It's where communities often get stagnant and run into problems, is dealing with conflict, dealing with boundary setting, dealing with differences of opinion. So just inviting peace and understanding in those topics.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for that. That's beautiful. I think the only thing that I would add to that for myself, when I first moved to Vernon and then Salmon Arm, the first thing I did was look up the men's circle. So it was instant community. Not only that, but instantly there was this group of men that I could communicate with and share about, this exploration of Sweat Lodge and Indigenous teachings, and invite them up for the sweat or talk to the elder who I was, getting to know, and things that are a passion for me. And then that would be reciprocated. And I started hunting with this fellow who took me out a number of times and showed me the ropes. And so there was this reciprocity that was happening right away. So, and also though, when I was in Squamish and then Vernon, another thing that I reached out to right away was the Waldorf School. And I found that to be a hub of like-minded people to a degree. And then moving up to Salmon Arm, which is, just as an aside, such a beautiful place, and a beautiful, like this young, not age-wise, but in terms of, those community aspects, it seems to have, it's in its infancy, which is perfect because there's people coming together. There's not too much that has been formed, that has been kind of like, there's no paradigm or hierarchy, that I can see, within this community. And so we're able to kind of do it together, at least the group of people that we're aligning with. But the fact that there wasn't a Waldorf school, though, created this opening for the Anara, for the vision that you have, because I think there's potential to be inspired by institutions like the Waldorf, and to look at that, to learn from that, and then to start to build something that's actually even more aligned with what's coming down the pike, with what's in our hearts and what we're wanting to offer to our children, in terms of that guidance. And for me, a lot of it is that indigenous wisdom, that connection of the indigenous teachings, but also with the higher level, the teachings of, Christian mythology. I would say Christ and the Divine Mother, and, these archetypes and these spirits, but without, the religious, constructs and dogmatic kind of undertone, and the paradigm, that has a colonial foundation. So we get to kind of, it's just like a really lovely time to be alive. I just can't stress that enough. I mean, any reflections on that?
Well, I definitely second it. It's a great time to be alive. We're at a very special time in human history. Not to put any pressure on anybody, but they do say that if you're down here at this time, you might have some big shoes to fill. So, going back to what I said earlier, I always think MO number one is kind of determining what those shoes are and then filling them, and having that be the fun journey of this human experience, is figuring out why you're here, what you're here to do, and then just doing that. And, if you talk to anybody who's on purpose, on path, whatever words resonate for you, they're always having a good time. And not that they don't have challenges and have to up level and grow and expand and run into challenges and roadblocks. All that stuff is guaranteed on the journey. But when your journey is being led by spirit and is coming from somewhere inside of you that's greater than you, it really gives you this kind of trust in the greater sense, trust in the universe. And that can be, that can really bring a sense of safety, that you can't get in any suburb with any 6-foot fence or alarm system, and I think that's part of the inner safety and security that we find on our journey, because there are so many unknowns. We are doing things that haven't been done before. We are stepping out of our comfort zone on the regular. But if we have that connection to spirit and we have that inner trust, that inner compass that's leading us the right way, then we can find a sense of groundedness and a sense of security and safety in that journey, and then we can make it a very enjoyable adventure, and have a good time.
Yeah, and you walk the walk. One thing that I notice about you, that you're carrying this wisdom, and you have I want to say ambition or drive, but it's like the willingness to step into your purpose and to put the work in. But you do it with a certain levity, where you're not taking it all too seriously. You're taking it seriously without it, becoming serious, which is like this cosmic giggle, that we need to remember the absurdity in all of it, in this soupiness that we're all a part of. We can create coherence, but is it really as coherent as we like to think it is all the time? And the answer to that is absolutely not. There's this underlying kind of cosmic giggle, and I think that you're attuned to that, and it's a beautiful thing. So, on that note, any closing comments before we sign off here?
No, just acknowledging those of you who are on the journey, for being on the journey. And I hope you stay committed. I hope you keep learning and growing. I hope you can find an inner compass that keeps you going and keeps you, going in a direction you can trust in. And let's enjoy the human experience. My understanding is we're also here to have a good time and to really enjoy our time down here on Earth. So let's not take things too seriously, but let's also know that it's a serious job and it is serious business, but not to be unglued about it. And and thanks again for having me, Mark. And I do hope we can have some conversations over time and touch back on certain points and see where the Rainbow Bridge is taking us to.
Yeah, exactly. Charting that path It's going to be interesting and enjoyable to do that. Well, thank you very much for your time, Luke, and look forward to the forthcoming men's circle and the future conversations. And prioritizing the young ones, and for us, are the child within, and the adult, without, but our children, and creating that path in a good way, and doing our work, and trying to, making sure we don't take it too seriously. I guess that's all for tonight. Thank you, everyone, for showing up. Have a beautiful day. This is Mark A. Lewis, Sacred Village Podcast, over and out. I lay my head down. Check out my lovely partner's music, Christina Jessen, at christinajessen.com. And there's also more information on what we're doing. We're doing a land project up here, traditional land development with a community intention. And if you're interested in any of the retreats that we're a part of and part of organizing, you can find all that information at sacredvillagepodcast.com. Have a wonderful day. Café.